Among the hallways leading to the tower doors, a man named Bam was chasing a girl named Rachel. His labored breathing did not stop him from walking. His hands stretched out to reach the girl, until finally Bam managed to pull the red shawl Rachel was wearing, making Rachel turn around in surprise suddenly. Rachel's body became unbalanced and made her fall. Bam, who was about to help Rachel, also fell and fell on Rachel's body. Luckily, Bam managed to hold her body with both hands, which were right next to Rachel's head. The two of them stared at each other in shock, until Bam finally made the first sound. Bam asked where Rachel was going and ran off in such a hurry. Rachel was silent at first, hearing Bam's question, until finally Rachel said that she was going to the top of the tower to get to the outside world, because Rachel was sick of living in a dark world. Bam was touched and couldn't believe Rachel's words. Rachel's hand slowly held Bam's face and apologized, asking Bam to forget her and allow her to be reborn. Suddenly, a light appeared from under Rachel's body. Rachel, who realized it, smiled very happily, while Bam was surprised and didn't want Rachel to leave. Just then, the tower door opened slightly and revealed a light from behind the door. Bam shouted that if Rachel left, then he would follow Rachel to her death. No matter how hard Bam shouted, Rachel still left and disappeared from Bam's sight, and the tower door closed with a loud noise. Bam's vision became pitch black. He continued to mumble so that Rachel would not leave, until finally Bam's eyes opened and he woke up on an unfamiliar floor. The room was dark and dimly lit. There were only a few lights on the walls with ancient paintings. The stone-brown walls made Bam wonder where he was. In the midst of his confusion, Bam saw a light shining quite brightly above the patterned wall, a straight light that looked from a distance like a star with purple light on the side. Bam was in a fairly large room, standing transfixed, staring at the light above him, until a voice startled Bam and diverted his gaze. The surprised Bam immediately took the stance to attack by pulling out the weapon in his hand. Bam asked who was speaking by swinging his weapon at a figure smaller than Bam. His hands had only 3 fingers, rabbit ears, and no face. His body was white like porcelain. The figure also took out a weapon with a stick-like shape, but there were green crystal balls on both ends of the stick. The figure welcomed Bam inside the tower and said that it had been a long time since anyone had opened the gate by themselves. He introduced himself as the guardian of the ground floor of the tower named Hedon and asked what Bam's name was. Bam replied with a bow of his head. Bam was 25th and explained that it was the date of his birth. Hayden decided to call by Bam's name as it was too difficult to call by Bam the 25th. Hayden asked how Bam came to be there. Bam, who heard the question, immediately remembered and answered excitedly that he followed a girl and asked if a blonde girl was passing by. Hayden thought for a long time and was reluctant to answer for sure. Bam forced Hayden to tell the truth. Hayden could only answer that the answer Bam was questioning was above their heads by pointing to the direction of the light Bam saw. Hayden continued that if he wanted to find the answers and the girl Bam was looking for, then Bam had to go upstairs. Even if Bam is looking for wealth, eternal life, absolute power, magical skill, mystery, truth, glory, or happiness, it is all up there. This tower is the place to seek them all. With full conviction, Bam accepted all that as long as he could find Rachel. Hayden, who liked Bam's determination, would give Bam a test to see if Bam was worthy of going up. Bam was surprised and asked what kind of test Hayden meant. Hayden explained that each floor of the tower would have a test to see if Bam was worthy to go to the next floor, and each test will be determined by the administrators and rulers of each floor. Hayden started the test by swinging his stick. The orbs on both ends of the staff glowed blue quite brightly. The patterned wall in front of Bam suddenly turned into a large fence. Behind the fence, a monster appeared with sharp blue eyes. Hayden said Bola as the monster revealed its whole body. Bam asked what was Bola, and was the monster the test. Hayden replied that the round human-sized object was called Orb, and Bam had to enter the room where the monster was. Bam must pass or defeat the monster, a giant fish called the white armored eel that lives in Shinsu and swims through the tower. Bam will be considered a pass if he manages to break the black ball, but unfortunately the monster was aggressive as it hadn't eaten anything yet and was in the mating season. Bam looked hesitant and a little scared. Hayden, who could see the fear in Bam, said that if Bam was afraid, then Bam would never find what Bam was looking for. He started heating Bam up and belittling Bam's determination to never find Rachel, and kept talking to make Bam retreat because he was unable to fight the eel monster that was so fast and agile because it was inside Shinsu. Hayden even began to scare Bam in case the girl Bam was looking for was eaten by the eel or other monsters. Hayden doubted Bam's ability to move faster and offered for Bam to withdraw, because taking this exam was impossible for Bam, and said that Bam would be committing suicide if he took the exam. Therefore, instead of becoming eel food, Bam should forget about the girl and move on. Bam, who heard that, kept thinking of Rachel and didn't want to lose her. The longing in Bam made Bam feel a strong conviction and without thinking jumped to enter the room where the monster was. Hayden stopped talking to see Bam, who left without a word. Then he chuckled as if he underestimated Bam's strength. A man shouted for Princess Yuri, who was running down the tower stairs. He chased after Princess Yuri and asked what Princess Yuri wanted to do on the first floor and begged for an answer. Still descending the stairs, Princess Yuri replied that on the ground floor there was an irregular who could open the gate by himself. The man named Ivan was surprised and didn't believe it. But Princess Yuri assured him that it was true. Evan was amazed that it was really true and said it was amazing. Princess Yuri also replied that because of that, this was a very important event, and the irregular was together with Hayden and his first exam was about to begin. Evan was surprised and wondered if Princess Yuri would witness the first exam. Princess Yuri asked, "Can I?" "Why?" Evan replied that it was a dangerous thing to watch the exam, and if Hayden finds out, then they are really in danger. Princess Yuri asked if Evan was afraid. If he was, then Evan was a coward. Princess Yuri didn't listen to Evan's warning and continued down the many stairs, until finally they reached the first floor. Both of them stopped at a large hole in the floor. Both of them were on top and looking down. Evan shuddered in fear and hoped that Hayden wouldn't know they were there. Princess Yuri said that the irregular was down there along with Hayden. Evan asked if he was really there. Princess Yuri said would Evan like to see it too. Evan replied because he was already there, so inevitably he would also see it. Bam stood with a determined look and a butcher knife-shaped weapon in his right hand. In front of him, Hayden was talking to Bam quite seriously. Princess Yuri commented that Bam looked nothing special at all. She thought that Bam might be a monster like Yuri. Princess Yuri felt very disappointed and asked Evan's opinion as a guide. Would Evan be able to see if Bam had a secret power like a sudden metamorphosis? Evan, who was peeping from above with Princess Yuri, watched Bam quite intently. He commented that Bam was quite agile despite his small body. He didn't look like a mixed species. Evan didn't feel the unusual power he usually felt from the previous irregulars. He was just an ordinary human. Princess Yuri was shocked in disbelief, asking if the irregulars were all erect with tree trunk legs. Evan replied that the erect was not that big. Princess Yuri sighed in disappointment and felt that she was wasting her time coming there. Princess Yuri sat down and leaned back feeling very disappointed. Meanwhile, Evan continued to watch Bam and commented that Bam was a little strange, because until now the irregulars were very strong just like Contaminum or Vurek. But Bam seemed unfit to be tested. Princess Yuri also thought that it was impossible for an ordinary human to take this test. But suddenly Evan shouted and said that it wasn't a ball for the test and using a white armor eel for the test was a bit much. Such a powerful creature was usually used for exams of the 20th floor and above. Evan concluded that maybe Bam was tested like this to give up easily. Princess Yuri replied that maybe it was because Hayden didn't like irregulars and he was trying to get him to give up. Princess Yuri also underestimated Bam and thought it was impossible for Bam to reach the inner tower, whether or not he took the test. Even if Bam took the exam, he would die sooner or later. Princess Yuri got curious and got up from her seat. She sat next to Evan and said that Bam was a poor boy. Should they just help him? Evan was surprised at Princess Yuri's idea and asked why Princess Yuri would want to do that. Princess Yuri smiled and said that it would be fun because the irregulars could bring chaos to the tower. As Bam was about to jump, suddenly someone shouted to stop. Bam was startled and looked up at the source of the voice. His eyes rounded in surprise and asked who it was that was jumping. Was it a giant? The giant's foot landed right on his face quite hard. Bam fell instantly before he could dodge. Meanwhile, Princess Yuri managed to land well and stood in front of Bam. The two of them stared at each other. Bam was confused as to who was standing in front of him and looked down at him with a sharp gaze. Princess Yuri greeted Bam coldly and asked if Bam wanted to die. Bam was silent and did not answer. Princess Yuri again asked if he understood her words. Bam was still silent and asked himself what she was talking about. Princess Yuri also looked back and looked at Hayden sarcastically. She asked if Hayden had given Bam the bag yet. Hayden replied that he just remembered. Bam, who was already standing, walked over to the two. Princess Yuri, who heard Hayden's answer, stared angrily. She said, "Isn't Hayden the oldest caretaker in this tower? Did he do it on purpose?" Princess Yuri accused. Hayden replied, stammering, and explained that it was not like that. He could also be wrong. But Princess Yuri didn't listen to Hayden's answer and called Ivan to come down from above. "Don't just stand there." Princess Yuri, who did not hear the answer, continued to call Ivan and forced Evan to come down quickly. Forced with a heavy and upset feeling, Evan came down and cursed irritably. When Evan came down and stood in front of the three, Hayden looked at Ivan and recognized Ivan. He said that Evan was Princess Yuri's guide, Evan Nidrak. Evan laughed stiffly and greeted Hayden kindly. He said that it had been a long time and Hayden looked young and healthy. Princess Yuri interrupted and said to cut the pleasantries and asked if Evan had an extra bag. She asked Evan to give the bag to Bam, because she thought that Hayden wouldn't give it to Bam. Evan, who was carrying a big bag on his back, immediately dropped his bag and took the bag in question. Evan said, "Is this why Princess Yuri asked him to come down?" Evan immediately approached Bam and held out a round white bag with a strange pattern. Evan, who was shorter than Bam, held out the bag and said that the Raina bag was for Ivan. It might be too good, but it was all Ivan had. Bam looked at the bag in confusion. He asked himself, "What is it? What's it for him?" Without getting an answer, Bam reached out his hand and touched the bag. Suddenly, as Bam's finger touched the bag, a light came out of the bag and the bag broke apart and flew around Bam. Bam's eyes glazed over in awe of the bag. The round bag came back together and floated beside Bam. Evan then said, "Does Bam understand what he's saying now?" Princess Yuri replied that the bag was too good for Bam. Therefore, Bam should thank Ivan. Princess Yuri even called Bam neck, making Evan stare in surprise. Bam realized that the pouch made him understand a language he didn't understand before, and made Bam understand what Princess Yuri and Evan were saying. Bam began to make noise and asked if it was because the ball made him understand their language. Princess Yuri replied bingo, but Bam said that it was impossible. Evan immediately introduced himself and said that he was Evan Idrak, a rank A and ranker guide in the tower. Evan also introduced Princess Yuri, who was also a ranker. The bag he just gave was an important object that must be owned if you want to climb the tower, and actually it has many functions. But the most important thing was that it was a translator of all languages into Mexes. Evan continued for Bam to try to say disappearing mode. Bam did so, and the bag disappeared. Bam was shocked and panicked. Evan reassured him that it only made the ball appear to disappear, but it was actually still there. If Bam said visible mode, then the ball would be visible again. Bam thanked her and said that since Princess Yuri had given him the bag, he wouldn't discuss her kick. Princess Yuri did not respond and looked at Hayden. She asked if Hayden really wanted to force Bam out just because he was an irregular. Hayden replied that she misunderstood. He took the exam legally and never tried to force Bam out. Princess Yuri snorted in disbelief and said that this exam was appropriate for the 20th floor and above. Hayden replied, "Did Princess Yuri forget that she was an irregular? All the regulars who enter the palace have extraordinary power. This exam is appropriate for an irregular because they are special." Bam, who had been silent and listening all this time, seemed surprised to hear the conversation between Princess Yuri and Hayden. Princess Yuri stared sharply as if disagreeing with Hayden's words. With courage, Bam asked for permission to interrupt their conversation. He asked if they kept saying that he was an irregular. But what is an irregular? Princess Yuri answered casually that irregulars were those who could open the gate and enter the tower of their own free will. Irregulars were not chosen to enter the tower, because only those who are chosen should be able to enter the palace. But sometimes irregulars like them manage to enter. Since ancient times, irregulars have always brought chaos and change. Because they have unusual powers, they are feared by everyone. But Princess Yuri suddenly pointed at Bam and said that Bam was not like an irregular in a louder voice, making Bam surprised to hear it. Princess Yuri continued that Bam was small in stature and had no special powers. Maybe he would be handsome, but even the guides said that Bam was just an ordinary boy. Compared to other irregulars, Bam looks more like a baby. Bam, who heard that, laughed in disbelief and was a little annoyed. Princess Yuri continued. She said to Hayden, wouldn't it be fair if Hayden lowered the difficulty of the exam a little? Princess Yuri said by gently nudging Hayden to obey her words. Hayden was silent for a while and then answered whether Princess Yuri wanted Bam to go up. Princess Yuri was silent and did not answer Hayden's question. Then Hayden decided to accept Princess Yuri's proposal and would change the rules a little. Princess Yuri looked happy and relieved. Hayden continued, what if Princess Yuri lent one of the weapons to Bam? Princess Yuri was surprised and confused why Hayden proposed that. Hayden said that Princess Yuri's weapons are only for high-class rankers, so if Princess Yuri lends one of the weapons, it will be very beneficial for Bam. Hayden also asked, doesn't Princess Yuri have the Black March given by the king? Evan, who heard that, was surprised with rounded eyes. Princess Yuri hesitated. Hayden said if lending a weapon was against the rules, but he would allow it if Princess Yuri would lend him her weapon. Hayden asked if it was too much. Princess Yuri said silently and cursed if Hayden really knew what the Black March weapon was like. Hayden continued if Princess Yuri felt it was too much, then Bam would have to take the exam empty-handed. Without thinking, Princess Yuri immediately answered okay. He also asked what Bam's name was. The surprised Bam answered quickly that his name was 25th Bam. Princess Yuri asked Bam, would he climb the tower or would he give up? Bam replied that he couldn't give up with full confidence. Bam continued that he had to find someone. Princess Yuri embraced Bam and mocked that Bam already had a girlfriend. But Bam dodged and said it wasn't like that. Suddenly, Princess Yuri whispered in Bam's ear and said that Bam could die. Bam was surprised with rounded eyes. Princess Yuri continued if there was a possibility that Bam could die before finding the person he was looking for. Does Bam still want to go up? Bam fearlessly replied that it didn't matter. He would still go and smile quietly. But the sweat running down his face couldn't mask the fear he felt. Princess Yuri nodded and walked away from Bam. He understood and said, weapon supply mode is visible. Suddenly, several weapons were clearly visible in front of them. Princess Yuri took one of the weapons and gave the Black March to Bam. She asked Bam to take his Black March and said she would lend it to him temporarily. Bam was shocked in disbelief. Meanwhile, Evan immediately shouted and said that it was not allowed. Evan asked how Princess Yuri could give away the Black March like that. Evan forbade Princess Yuri from doing that because if the king found out, then he could be killed by the king. Bam refused and said that Princess Yuri didn't need to lend him such a valuable weapon, but Princess Yuri insisted and said didn't Bam want to go up at all costs. Bam was stunned and stretched out his hand to touch the weapon. Princess Yuri explained that the weapon was the Black March, a needle weapon, the basic weapon in the tower. Needles are used for stabbing and stabbing. The Black March is the greatest needle-type weapon. It is one of the 13 Moon series weapons created by Aguero. The weapon was half alive, and when Bam activated it, once it would produce tremendous power. But Princess Yuri reminded him that even if Bam had that weapon, there was still a small chance that Bam would be able to pass his test, because no matter how good the weapon is, it only depends on the ability of the user. But if Bam still wants to take this exam, then Princess Yuri will lend it to him. Evan interrupted and begged Princess Yuri not to lend Black March the weapon. But Princess Yuri didn't care and said that this was her wish and asked Evan to shut up. Bam thanked Princess Yuri and promised to return it. Bam walked with determination and carried the Black March weapon, which was shaped like a black sword. He walked and stopped at a wall that had turned into a large fence. Evan asked Princess Yuri why she would help Bam by giving him the Black March. Did Princess Yuri fall in love with Bam at first sight? But Princess Yuri didn't answer and told Evan to shut up and hit Ivan, making Evan fall down in pain. His bowed head continued his question and guessed, did Princess Yuri think that the irregulars would change the tower? Princess Yuri replied that she didn't have time to fantasize and said that she liked Bam's style. Bam, who was standing in front of the fence, raised his face and looked at the white-armored eel that was about to attack him. With confidence, Bam drew his black march towards the giant eel with his eyes closed. Moments later, Bam opened his eyes with a cold stare. Bam thought of Rachel standing on the rock. To Bam, Rachel was his star. She was the one who taught him to speak, told him about the outside world, taught him the warmth of humans, and she was the one who gave him a reason to live. Since Bam was born trapped in darkness, he had never lain under the cover of night. But Bam, who was wearing a white dress with long black hair, sat hugging his knees as Rachel came to stretch out her arms and blend into his darkness. The sky above him became a beautiful night sky. Bam opened his eyes coldly. He remembered Princess Yuri's words that he would die if he took this exam. But Bam did not care about that. For him, there was something more frightening than death. Princess Yuri, who was watching from afar, had doubts about Bam's ability even though she had lent him her weapon. She felt that even though she had allowed him to go take this exam, she felt that it would be impossible for Bam to pass this exam. Because of this, Princess Yuri asked Evan if he knew a way to win against the white-armored eel. Evan paused and finally replied that honestly their strengths were too far apart and they could only hope for a miracle. Princess Yuri sighed and said that Evan thought so too. Inside Shinsu, Bam was still standing staring at the big eel with both wings flapping as if it was preparing to attack Bam. Evan, who saw that, spoke to himself that there was actually one way for Bam to fight the eel and pass this test. The difference in their strength was quite large, so surely Bam would avoid fighting the eel and try to run and escape and pop the black ball behind the big eel. But Evan thought that would be impossible because the eel inside the Shinsu was so high-powered that it would move very quickly, and thought that Bam would not be able to escape from the eel inside the Shinsu. And if he wants to win, then Bam must try not to escape, because the only way to win this test was to fight the eel directly. Evan thought that Bam wouldn't be able to do it openly and would never be able to defeat the eel like that. For a hungry eel, Bam was not an opponent at all. It was just a snack. If it doesn't fight back, the eel will swallow it whole, and that's when the opportunity to fight back came. Once the eel is no doubt about to swallow it, that's when Bam should thrust the black march on the eel's tongue calmly and accurately. Evan continued that it wouldn't have worked if he hadn't used the black march, because that weapon could produce a powerful enough attack temporarily to knock it down. And when the eel was in pain, then Bam could run and pop the ball. If Bam could do that, he could pass the test and move up to the next floor. But Evan couldn't tell him, because the guides would only give way to those who could do it. According to Evan, Bam wouldn't be able to do it and would fail. Even though no one would actually be able to do it, if anything, only crazy people could do such crazy things. That's why Evan thought not to tell Bam about it. For Evan, rather than dying with false hope, it was better to fight for hours and realize his limits. And Bam would be saved by Princess Yuri. Evan thought that it was better for Bam to run away from there and realize the limits Bam had, and forget about wanting to go up to the next floor, because that was the only way Bam could survive. However, Bam was not what Evan thought. Bam was not that weak and scared, because now Bam was still standing there staring calmly at the big eel that was ready to pounce on Bam. Princess Yuri, who saw this, was shocked and shouted for Bam to run and escape from the eel. Evan wondered why Bam was just standing still like that. Princess Yuri continued to shout frantically and told Bam to run and pop the ball. Evan was even more surprised and didn't expect Bam to be so scared. But he had another feeling. Was Bam preparing to enter the eel's body? Does Bam know how to pass this test like what he thinks? He also asked if Bam could do it. The silent Bam didn't move an inch, staring fearlessly even though the eel's mouth was already open. Even Bam could clearly see how big the eel's teeth were with the saliva that kept dripping. Bam held his black march very tightly. He was so confident and held back his fear. Until finally Bam actually entered the eel's mouth, which was now closed. Princess Yuri was shocked and said, "Did Bam disappear?" In panic, Princess Yuri immediately ran to save Bam. But Evan held Princess Yuri's hand and said that that was how he defeated her. Princess Yuri was silent and looked at Ivan in disbelief. Ivan continued that that was the way to win. Princess Yuri doesn't believe it and asked if it's possible to win by eating. Evan replied that it's not like that, and look at what is now happening to the big eel. From the mouth of the white-armored eel flowed quite a lot of blood. Its eyes suddenly widened, and it vomited blood suddenly. Its mouth automatically opened, and inside was Bam, who was stabbing the eel's palate with the black march he was holding. Shortly after, Bam was thrown out of the eel's mouth and fell on the floor still holding the black march that was detached from the eel's palate. Princess Yuri asked, "Did Bam stab him from the inside?" Evan replied that it was true. Facing him without a fight was the way to pass this test, but for that he had to concentrate and assess the situation quickly and had to have guts. That was the purpose of this test according to Evan. He even asked Hayden if his thoughts were correct. Hayden only replied that maybe so. Princess Yuri then glanced sharply at Ivan and asked why he didn't tell him from the beginning. Evan replied that it would be useless normally. Then he fell silent and continued silently. That often, even if someone thinks of what they should do, it doesn't necessarily mean they can do it. Courage and determination don't come easily, because courage is built from confidence gained from continuous practice. But what Bam had was not similar to courage nor determination. The fear of losing the person Bam was looking for swallowed all those fears. To Evan, Bam was crazy. Bam, who had temporarily paralyzed the eel, ran straight to the large black ball at the back. When he arrived, without thinking, Bam immediately stabbed the black ball with his black march. But strangely, the ball didn't pop. Bam, who saw that, said to himself that nothing had happened. The ball didn't pop even though it had been stabbed with all its might. Princess Yuri, who was very happy because she saw Bam succeeded in paralyzing the big eel, frowned and asked Hayden why the ball did not pop even though it had been stabbed by the black march. Because he just found out about this. Hayden just cleared his throat and Princess Yuri pressed for an answer. Hayden replied that maybe the ball was made of good material and ended with a suspicious grin. Bam managed to stab a black ball that was the size of his body, but strangely, it didn't pop at all. It didn't even move at all. No matter how hard Bam moved the orb with the black march still stuck. Bam complained in annoyance why the ball couldn't be popped. Princess Yuri, who saw that, asked Hayden if he deliberately wanted Bam to fail from the start. Princess Yuri, who was upset, asked that the exam be stopped, but Hayden replied that he couldn't do it, because once the exam starts, it can only be ended when the participant gives up. Bam began to get annoyed but not desperate. He took out his weapon, a sizable butcher knife. Bam started hitting the big ball with the knife. He kept muttering for the big ball to pop. Princess Yuri yelled for Bam to give up and stop continuing his exam. But Bam continued to hit the big ball with full force, causing his weapon to shatter into pieces, no matter how many times Bam begged the ball to pop. But the ball remained intact with the black march still attached. Bam began to run out of breath. He took a deep breath and silently lamented his failure to pop the orb. Princess Yuri was still trying to shout for Bam to give up, until the large eel that was still unconscious began to move again. Princess Yuri stared in surprise and said that the eel was awake again. Evan was also surprised. Princess Yuri, who was impatient and panicked, was about to run to force Bam to stop this test and ask Evan to help. But Evan again held Princess Yuri's hand and said to wait. Evan continued that there wasn't anything else Bam could do with the black march. Princess Yuri was surprised and said that what Evan meant was, not having finished his words, Evan suddenly shouted at Bam for Bam to speak up and ask Black March for help. Ask Black March to turn on his power. Princess Yuri couldn't believe what Evan had just said. From the beginning, Evan was silent as if he didn't want to help Bam. But now he actually helped Bam and told him the true power of Black March. Bam, who heard that, was a little confused, but Evan continued to insist because Bam didn't have time. Do what he says if you don't want to die. Bam nodded in understanding and tried to talk to Black March. Princess Yuri suddenly rebuked Evan and said that Evan was crazy because Black March never exploded his power even for himself, the owner of Black March. According to Princess Yuri, Black March would never show its power to a stranger, especially since Bam was a new person. Evan interrupted and said that Black March would do it. Princess Yuri was surprised and asked if Evan was sure. Evan replied that he remembered that Princess Yuri had said that Black March had a tomboyish personality and that was why Princess Yuri found it difficult to control her. Even talking to Black March was difficult, let alone blowing her up. But Evan was confident that it would happen. Princess Yuri commented that what nonsense Evan was talking about. Evan replied that as a navigator, his senses were sharp and he felt that Bam could do it. Evan said silently to Bam that Evan knew if Bam also knew if there was something in him that could attract others. Bam began to concentrate. He held the handle of the Black March and looked down with his eyes closed. Bam pleaded silently and tried to speak to the Black March. Bam asked for help so that he could climb this tower. With all his heart and determination, Bam continued to beg and shout for Black March to help him. The big eel began to move and was about to attack Bam from behind. Princess Yuri, who saw that, couldn't be patient and was about to run to help Bam. But Evan muttered that Bam had succeeded. Suddenly, a yellow light came out of the Black March. Bam, who closed his eyes, was surprised by the voice of someone in front of him. Bam raised his face in surprise. A woman with long yellow hair asked Bam if he really wanted to go up. Was Bam that desperate to reach the top? Bam doesn't answer her question and stares in surprise. Bam asked if she was Black March. The woman did not answer and hovered in front of Bam with a golden yellow light. She said of gold, precious stones and jewelry, magical fruits and heavenly beauty, not to mention a sense of power and glory. What drove Bam to climb the tower? Bam, who listened, evaded all that in his heart. He wanted nothing but one thing, Rachel. Black March was surprised and asked if Rachel was a name jeweler or a position of power, or is she the most beautiful woman in the tower? Bam replied that no, Rachel was the name of this friend who had spent time with him in the past. Bam began to describe Rachel as neither a jewel nor the most beautiful woman in the world. To Bam, Rachel was a tomboyish woman who liked to joke around and sometimes lied to him, but she was the most important person in his life. If Bam could find her, then he wouldn't have to climb this tower. Black March was initially confused and surprised by all of Bam's answers. Then he commented that Bam was very boring. Then Black March touched both of Bam's cheeks and said that even so it didn't mean he didn't like men like Bam. Because according to Black March, Bam is his type, and he would help Bam just this once. Then suddenly the handle of the Black March held by Bam began to shake. Bam woke up from his subconscious and saw something surprising. A bright light shone from the orb. Bam was shocked and said what power was going on. The orb began to crack slowly and quickly exploded quite violently. Princess Yuri, who saw it, asked if it was an explosion from the Black March. Evan was happy that his guess was right. Princess Yuri still couldn't believe that Black March was giving his power to Bam because he never did that to her. A golden yellow light exploded with great force. Princess Yuri, who saw that, was offended and felt that Black March had committed gender discrimination. She scolded the young Black March for being out of control in the hands of a cute boy. Evan, who heard that, commented that his assumption about Princess Yuri not getting along with Black March was correct. But they stopped arguing when they saw the light on Black March getting bigger and felt that it would be very dangerous because usually the ball would not erupt like that. Bam felt the same way, immediately pulling Black March away from the shattered ball. Princess Yuri felt something was wrong and asked Hayden what he had done to the ball. But slowly Bam began to sink into the darkness, and suddenly they just disappeared as the light went out. Princess Yuri and Evan were shocked again and saw Bam, who did not appear at all. Princess Yuri asked Hayden again. Hayden replied that he didn't do anything to the ball. He just granted Bam's wish. Princess Yuri gasped because Bam had gone upstairs. She asked what exactly was in Hayden's mind to do this. Hayden answered that he only tested those who came to this tower. He only prepares tests that match their wishes. This is the destiny of the tower administrator. Then Hayden asked if Princess Yuri had to follow Bam because she brought her Black March. Princess Yuri patted her forehead and said that Hayden's habit was very annoying. She also invited Evan to go find Bam. Evan complied and followed Princess Yuri's lead by pulling her big bag. After their departure, the place became very quiet. Hayden looked at Shinsu for a while, then he walked away from Shinsu. Hayden suddenly talked to himself. He asked if he saw him. Hayden continued, what will she do now that Bam has gone up? Meanwhile, Princess Yuri is again ranting angrily. She was annoyed and intended to pull out Haven's rabbit ears. Princess Yuri was annoyed because she didn't know where to look for Bam now. Plus, Bam also brought his Black March. She was in a dilemma whether to look for Black March or not because she was already in love with Bam. While Evan was just silent since before, it made Princess Yuri realize and ask what Evan was thinking about. Evan answered whether he was like Bam when he first came here. Princess Yuri immediately evaded and said that Evan was not at all like Bam with a flat face. Evan, who heard it, became annoyed because Princess Yuri compared his face to Bam's face. Evan continued, will Bam change too? Princess Yuri asked, not understanding the meaning of Evan's question. Evan explained that there are so many things in this tower that Bam has never seen or felt. There will be extraordinary beauty or great power that will attract his attention. Would Bam follow his friend no matter what? Could there still be such unwavering passion? Evan even said that he no longer remembered his purpose in coming to the tower. Evan thought that Bam would definitely change like the rest of them. Princess Yuri was offended and angry at Evan for saying that she was changing too and immediately slapped Evan's head quite hard. Evan said it was because they were partners. Princess Yuri let go of Evan's head and walked away. She said not to take it too seriously and just focus on finding Bam. Evan fell and coughed because he was almost out of breath. Then he asked, wouldn't Bam be on the floor of the Vankel? Princess Yuri stopped and turned to look at Evan. She asked what did he mean by the exam floor. Evan explained that ordinary invitations would go there first when coming to the tower. The exam floor is where candidates test their qualifications to ascend. Evan concluded that Hayden must have sent him there. Princess Yuri thought with her hands folded. She said that the exam floor was a bit dangerous. So she decided to infiltrate the exam floor to get Bam out and retrieve her Black March. Evan immediately refused and said that they were forbidden to come there in a panic. But Princess Yuri didn't care and asked Evan to show her the way there. Evan tapped his forehead and complained that Princess Yuri never wanted to follow the rules. Princess Yuri then said that Evan was still the same as when they first met. He is also still short, said Yuri with a grin. Evan took offense and forbade Princess Yuri to make fun of his racial makeup. Bam thought back to Rachel, saying that Rachel taught him everything. What he heard, read, and felt were all thanks to Rachel. A long time ago, when Bam was still his old self, he had asked Rachel what fighting was. Rachel was surprised because she had already answered him. But patiently, Rachel explained to Bam that a fight was two people hurling abuse or bad words at each other out of hatred. Bam interjected that he knew, but he didn't understand why people fight, why they hate each other, why they say hurtful words to each other. Bam said that he had lived with Rachel for a long time and he had never hated her. Rachel smiled amusedly and said that if someone hit or abused him, how would Bam feel? Bam, who was looking seriously at Rachel, was surprised and lowered his face. He said that if that were the case, then he would probably get angry. Rachel asked if that was the case, would Bam fight with that bad person for her sake? Bam replied quickly that he definitely would. Bam looked at Rachel and Rachel nodded in agreement, then rubbed Bam's head with a smile. Bam was happy and felt that Rachel was a genius. On the exam floor, or Evankel, Bam was lying among the tall weeds. Suddenly, a box appeared and emitted someone's voice. His voice woke Bam from his sleep. The surprised Bam woke up and asked where he was now. Bam was confused. Was he still in the tower? Because it was quite bright in there. The voice from the box started talking and welcomed all the regular participants who made it to the second floor, the Evankel floor. He explained that the Evankel floor was the test floor where they did the final exam to see if the beach participants went up to the tower. Bam, who was listening, remembered Haven's words that every floor would have a test. Bam understood that this was a test to get up to the tower like what Haven said. Bam said that he had just arrived, but he already had to pass this test, because if he didn't pass, then he wouldn't be able to go up to the next floor. The box continued that he would explain everything in detail later. And now the first exam was about to begin. The first exam was very simple. He would explain the rules, so asked all participants to listen well. The rules are that there are already 400 participants here. Bam got up from his seat and looked up at the sky. Bam asked what did he mean by doing anything. The box continued that the test would end when there were 200 participants. The exam started now. Bam was confused. The exam started with a big gust of wind. Bam felt a sense of foreboding along with the gloomy air. Suddenly, a very loud shouting sound was heard, making Bam feel something dangerous. He could even inhale the scent of blood from the wind. Bam looked up at the weeds that were taller than his body. His intuition began to scream, hearing the sound of movement from within the dense weeds. Bam's eyes rounded with a crack. His body reflexively turned around and started running. However, the feeling of nervousness and fear that haunted Bam made him fall and dislocate his leg. Just as Bam started to stand up and run again, a monster came and stopped behind Bam. A light brown monster with long hair and pigtails started chasing Bam. The monster was carrying a large sword. Bam turned his head and saw the monster. He immediately ran. However, his steps were not fast enough for the monster to get close to Bam. The monster shouted for Bam to stop because running away would only make Bam tired. Suddenly, the monster threw its sword at Bam. Bam managed to avoid the monster's slash and fell down. But Bam immediately stood up and ran back quickly. The monster complained that Bam was fast and troublesome. However, a flying arrow shot out and hit the monster. The monster screamed in pain and asked who had shot him. Hearing that made Bam stop and see a woman standing on a hill with a bag of arrows on her back. She shot enough arrows at the monster to kill it. The woman saw where Bam was and smiled ambitiously and targeted Bam. Before she could release the arrow, the woman was shot in the head, killing her instantly. Bam paused and realized that in order to advance to the next floor, all participants had to kill each other. Bam began to feel tense and was determined to be the 200th participant to survive. Suddenly, a giant monster appeared in front of him with a large and tall body. However, its head was round with many eyes around its head. Bam decided that in order to get to the next floor and become a survivor, he had to fight. Bam held his black march with both hands and prepared to fight. On the other side, there was a man with white hair staring flatly at a giant red monster that growled creepily. He had 4 hands with one of them holding a large sword. The white-haired man asked the red monster why he wanted to kill him, even though the man didn't do anything. Then the red monster replied with emotion if the man didn't understand that to become a survivor they had to kill each other. That was the point of this test. The man lowered his face and said that he understood. He said that's how stupid people think. Obviously, his words angered the red monster and told the man to stop his nonsense because it was time for him to die. The monster swore at the man and swung his sword, but the man immediately blocked the monster's sword with his brown bag. The monster was surprised at what kind of bag the man had that could withstand his sword attack. The man said that he disagreed with the monster's words. He said that when he heard the rules of this exam, then someone would kill 200 participants to pass this exam. And when he kills 200 participants, he will make 200 other participants as teammates. To that man, the rules did not limit him, and he would use them to dominate and control. He said that the monster wasn't even worthy of dominance, right after which he unleashed his power and knocked the monster down by stabbing it until it bled quite a lot. The man with the cold face then walked away with his bag and muttered if there was anyone worth taking to the tower. The sound of gunfire was deafening. Someone had been killed again. Far above, a foul-mouthed man in a dark green robe was shooting at the participants. He looked so haughty and arrogant. He said that the people down there were fools. They knew he was the one who had fired, but had no chance to reach him because they were too busy killing each other. He felt lucky to have been sent to a place near the hill and didn't deserve to be down below in the hustle and bustle. The man went back to his position to target the other participants. Just then a crocodile monster with a stick containing a red flag came and told the man to leave. But the man didn't care, and without looking he challenged the monster for daring to ask him to leave and told the monster to find another place. Before he finished speaking, the monster immediately pulled the man who was smaller than him and threw him carelessly until the man screamed in pain. The monster took the man's place and threatened that if he didn't get out of the way, then he would get rid of the man. The man seemed unafraid and feeling annoyed. He asked who the monster was. The monster glanced sharply and said that the man should leave as the place had become the property of the hunters. The man still stood his ground and asked why did he take his place. But the monster didn't answer and asked what was this thing he was holding. The man replied that it was his rifle. Hearing that, the monster immediately threw it without feeling guilty into the ravine. The man protested and said who told him to throw away his gun. Didn't he know how much money he had spent to get that weapon? The monster was annoyed and told the man to stop talking or else would he just fight with him. Obviously, the man immediately backed off and walked away, but he didn't stop talking that he would retaliate and shot him between the eyes. After the man left, the monster stared at the wheat field below him. He said to himself, "Is there anything worth hunting?" The monster also saw some people down there. Some of them looked strong enough to make the monster not choose them, until it saw a lizard monster that had something quite strong. But when the monster took a closer look, it realized the powerful aura came from the weapon it was holding. Right at that moment, the lizard monster glanced at him and smiled horribly. The monster averted its eyes because it thought it would be very difficult to slay it. After that, he realized that there was a weapon that had the same powerful aura. He searched the area and managed to find it. It was the Black March held by Bam. Bam stood a little frightened. He was confused because he knew that the giant monster in front of him was not aware of his presence. Bam wondered if he stabbed it now, then he would win. With his body and hands shaking, Bam tried to convince himself to attack the monster. Just as he was getting ready, suddenly someone came to stop the action. It was a white-haired man who came with a bag and walked casually. The man said that with improper posture, even a rabbit wouldn't be caught. He continued that the many-eyed race would not attack because it had a soft heart. Bam, who saw the white-haired man's presence, was astonished and wondered who was stopping him. The giant monster really didn't attack and went to sleep. Bam sighed in relief and sat down casually beside the man with white hair. Bam thanked the man for stopping him. The man accepted Bam's words and then said that the many-eyed race didn't exist in the tower. Then he asked Bam where he was from. Why did he know about the many-eyed race? Bam was about to answer, but he stopped and remembered Princess Yuri's words saying that non-regulars always bring chaos and change. Because they have extraordinary power, they have become a symbol of fear. Bam changed his answer and said that he couldn't tell. Bam thought that he couldn't tell the truth. The man looked at Bam suspiciously, then said that Bam didn't have to tell if he didn't want to. The man got up and said goodbye, saying that he would see Bam if he passed the exam. Bam thanked him again for his help, but suddenly the man stopped and asked Bam again if Bam had any pets with him. Bam was surprised and asked why were they suddenly talking about pets. The white-haired man pointed at the big monster in front of them and said the big crocodile was in front of them. The crocodile monster took offense and spoke with his red eyes that he wasn't a crocodile, but a wraith racer shelf hunter. The white-haired man didn't feel scared and commented how much is a talking crocodile worth. Obviously that provoked the crocodile monster's emotions and said that he was not a crocodile and had no business with him. He was only interested in the black turtle, pointing at Bam who was looking at them in confusion. The crocodile monster asked the white-haired man not to bother him. Bam was surprised and confused. Why would the crocodile monster be interested in him? The white-haired man asked what was wrong with the black-haired man. The crocodile monster replied that it was time to hunt. The black turtle was his prey and the little white turtle should stay away. Bam gaped and was surprised that he was the target of the hunt. Meanwhile, the white-haired man continued on his way and excused himself because he felt it was none of his business. However, he was curious as to why the crocodile monster was interested in Bam. To the white man, Bam was a strange person and there was nothing special about him. He wondered why Bam was chosen to be the first regular participant to fight. Even though Bam looked very fragile and could die at any time, the man patted his forehead and felt depressed at the thought. The crocodile monster walked up to Bam with a creepy aura. Bam felt nervous and asked the crocodile monster to stop. He asked why the crocodile monster would want to hunt him. He didn't have much meat and wasn't very tasty either. But the crocodile monster interrupted and pointed at Black March and said that he wanted to fight with a gun. Not finished talking, suddenly the white-haired man came back and hit the crocodile monster with his bag. It almost made the crocodile monster fall down. The white-haired man then shouted for Bam to run. Bam, who realized from his shock, immediately ran away along with the white-haired man. The annoyed crocodile monster shouted and asked them to stop, but they kept running. The crocodile monster swung his gun and was determined to catch them and fry them along with their shells. On the grassy field of Ivanko's floor, a thin man with an expressionless face walked up to a lizard monster that was also walking towards him. The two stared at each other with the ambition to attack and finish each other off. After a short distance, they stopped for a moment and looked back at each other. A murderous look was in both of their eyes. Soon they began to prepare by holding their respective weapons. The lizard monster with a long green weapon and the black-haired man with two swords on his left side. Just as they were about to attack, the sound of bushes stopped them in their tracks. A brown-haired man with an ordinary appearance wearing purple training clothes appeared. He was surprised to see two people in front of him who were already preparing to attack each other. The brown-haired man's presence didn't bother them. The lizard monster smiled and said that it was fun now. After speaking like that, the lizard monster immediately attacked by swinging his sword at the black-haired man, making the black-haired man and brown-haired man jump in surprise to avoid the attack. The lizard monster looked happy and shouted for them to run away. It felt very satisfied to see their fear. The brown-haired man clearly looked terrified, while the black-haired man took a stance with a calm face. Then he pulled the sword from its sheath and started to counter the lizard monster's attack. He said the sword flew the highest. Then suddenly the sword flew so high that it attracted the attention of the lizard monster, who was looking in the direction of the flying sword. The lizard monster was not caught off guard. He then prepared to attack again. But the black-haired man again said the lowest word, flying sword. That made the sword fall to the ground, which was immediately caught by the black-haired man and slashed the lizard monster, who was pushed far back. The lizard monster tried to block the attack with its green-colored weapon, but the force was great enough to make the lizard monster smile with its body trembling in fear. The black-haired man stared with a sharp and flat face. He said that running away is when the enemy is stronger, right? The lizard monster took offense and smiled in annoyance, while the brown-haired man, who was just silently watching, sensed the greatness in the two. He watched with an open mouth and bulging eyes, marveling at the strength of the two, until a few moments later, he realized that he was not considered at all by the two. On the other hand, the crocodile monster chasing Bam and the white-haired man was feeling very angry and emotional. He kept shouting at them to come out of hiding. Bam and the white-haired man hid behind a large rock. The white-haired man was relieved that the crocodile monster seemed to be warming up. He invited Bam to hide until the test was over. Bam nodded yes to the white-haired man's invitation. Then the white-haired man asked Bam why the crocodile monster was chasing Bam. Had Bam done something to him? Bam replied that the crocodile monster just wanted to fight with his weapon. The white-haired man was surprised and knew that the weapon was a needle. However, when he looked closer, the white-haired man was even more surprised to find out that the weapon was a black march. Bam was happy that the white-haired man knew what the weapon was and thought it was very famous. But the white-haired man immediately sat up and held Bam's hand and asked seriously where Bam got the black march from. Bam was shocked and at a loss for an answer. The white-haired man explained that the weapon was the personal treasure of Jihad, the Tower King, who had given it to his daughter. The man in white hair assumed the low-level man wouldn't be able to see it. He then asked how a regular participant not from the tower could get it, and she was not a woman either. Then he asked in a lower voice, who exactly was Bam. Bam became scared and nervous, worried that no one should know who he really was. Bam nervously replied that he was just an ordinary person. The white-haired man was disappointed and immediately pulled his body away. He said that Bam was stingy because he didn't want to repay him even though he had saved Bam. Bam bowed his head and was still confused about what to answer. He looked very nervous and confused. While the white-haired man was thinking seriously, he felt that Bam was a strange person. He thought Bam was too weak for a regular, and it didn't seem like Bam knew anything about towers. But Bam actually had a black march. He thought that Bam was too ordinary for a regular, but he was wrong. According to him, Bam was the most unusual of all the regulars there. He changed his mind and thought that he shouldn't be away from Bam because Bam would be useful. The man got up and extended his hand to Bam. Suddenly, he introduced himself as Con Aguero Ains and asked what Bam's name was. Bam was surprised at first, but he immediately accepted Con's hand and introduced himself as the 25th Bam. Con shook Bam's hand and squatted in front of Bam, saying that maybe Bam couldn't trust him yet. But Con was not angry and felt that it was natural because the exams here required them to fight and compete with each other to pass. However, Con said that he no longer cared about the rules because Con was determined to go to the tower together with Bam. Bam was surprised to hear Con's words with his convincing face. Then Bam repeated Con's words, who wanted to go to the tower with him. Even though Bam is not good at fighting, knows nothing, and is useless. Con smiled broadly with narrowed eyes. Con said it was okay, thinking Bam would be a fun friend. Bam was embarrassed and didn't think it would be fun. Then the two peeked behind a rock and saw a lizard monster that was still upset because it hadn't found the two. Bam commented that the funny one was the crocodile monster. Con replied that it was true because the crocodile monster also had talent, but he looked stupid. Con glanced at Bam, who was silent looking at the crocodile monster. Con thought that Bam might not know what it was like to be in the tower with Black March. He smiled, but his smile disappeared when he looked back at the crocodile monster, who was obsessed with Black March and kept looking for Bam's whereabouts. Back to the lizard monster's fight with the black-haired man. The brown-haired man, who felt offended at not being considered, said goodbye to the two to leave. But they didn't listen to the brown-haired man at all and just continued to fight fiercely.